Respiratory etiquette and cover your mouth if you cough or sneeze, preferably in the corner of your elbow. Wash your hands frequently and thoroughly. The CVRD will be working closely with our partners, including our member municipalities, First Nations, and the Vancouver Island Health Authority in the coming days. We will be providing updates to the public as required to keep you informed of a response and any known or anticipated impacts to service delivery. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll move to approval of the agenda. Do I have someone to move it? Thank you. It's been moved. Second. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries. And
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item 2, excuse me, adoption of the minutes. So item M1, the recommendation before you is that the minutes of the Community Services Committee meeting of November 13th, 2019 be adopted.
so moved. Second. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item M2, the recommendation before you is that the minutes of the Special Community Services Committee meeting of December 11th, 2019 be adopted.
Do a motion? Moved. Second. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There is no business arising, so we move to public input.
Thank you. So do we have anyone from the public who would wish to give input?
Yep, that'd be me. Sheila Bellerving, Shawnigan Lake. I'm asking about item C5, which is the charging for EVs. I am an EV owner and I love it. And I use the chargers at the Shawnigan Lake Community Center, and I go and I play with my puppy while I charge my car, and it's like multitasking, and I really enjoy that. And I would really hate to have to be charged for that because I already pay taxes towards the Shawnigan Community Center, and I very rarely use it unless there's a public meeting or something there. I don't have kids that are in dance or anything like that. So I feel my tax dollars that I pay towards the Shawnigan Community Center, which is fairly high, should go towards being able to charge my car once or twice or 3 times a week, depending on how much free time I have. And the Duncan Community Center has the only fast charger that costs money on the island. Now, oh, it's not? Okay, you can correct me later then. But anywhere else you can just charge in, because I've never actually fast charged, but I like the fact that it's there if I need to get somewhere quick. And these chargers were originally installed at the community center under a BC Hydro subsidy, because I was on the Shawnigan Lake Commission at that time and actually voted for it, even though there were several people that said, no, don't bother, it's not going to go anywhere. And I said, yeah, build it and they will come. So we want people to come to our community. And if you're going to be driving up from Victoria in an older EV like mine, and you go out to the Kinsale Trestle, you need to charge in order to get back down to Victoria again. So it's kind of stops people for 2 hours in our community, which is a good thing, because then they get to hang out and have coffee with us or just wander around and do stuff. But if you're going to start charging for it, it might actually stop people from coming to visit as much as they would in Shawnigan Lake, because we don't really have a lot of amenities. I know you're installing more chargers at the CVRD parking lot. Will you be charging your own fleet to charge? And will it be able to open to the public? Because I know when I park my car behind on Saturdays during market days, and I use the CVRD one on the parking lot down here, I've been threatened with being towed. So I just want to know if you're going to be installing these chargers, if they will be available for the public, say on weekends. I know during the week you need it because you got an electric fleet that has to go back and forth, but it would be nice that on the weekends we could charge our cars there while we're coming to the market and supporting the community. Thank you.
Is there anyone else from the public who wishes to make a comment on the agenda today? Seeing no one, I'll move to the next order of business. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next item is delegations. We have Erin Thompson from BC Transit regarding the inter-regional transit service between the Cowichan Valley Regional District and Regional District of Nanaimo.
Thank you. So actually it's the Jim Wakeham show today. And starting with Mr. Wakeham.
Thanks, Madam Chair and Directors. I just want to give a quick introduction here to the team that's been working on this interregion connection with the CVRD and the RDN for the past number of months. We've held 4 staff workshops that we've been working on and working our way through the planning session. And there is a staff report R1 that will be accompanying this presentation done by BC Transit. And also the same presentation is going to the Regional District Transit Committee tomorrow as well. So I just want to give you just an introduction here. From BC Transit, we have a number of people that are assisting us on this initiative. The presenter, Ellen Thompson, is here, and Erica Matador is going to co-present behind me. Levi Meganver is with us. Of course, Myrna's here with all transit stuff we do with BC Transit. And I don't see the representatives from the RDN, but Daniel Pierce, Erica Beauchamp, and Darren Marshall are all working on the staff side from their end, and from the CVRD, it's Rochelle and myself. So I also see Richard Lewis is in the audience here, which is a key destination and a partner in this endeavor. So I'll turn this over to these two to do their presentation, and then my understanding is the staff report will follow. I'm not sure, we'll ask, do you want to ask questions on the presentation to all of us, or do you want to wait to the staff report? You can let us know. Okay.
I think it's best if we wait till the end of the presentation, and welcome BC Transit. And if it goes longer than 10 minutes, I'll just have to interrupt you and we'll extend that,
I think you're
okay?
fine. Yeah, I think you're
Thanks so
expecting about
much.
5 minutes. Do you have it loaded there?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah, hey, so good afternoon. I'm Eric. This is Erin Thompson, and we're both transit planners with BC Transit. We're here today to provide an update on the Interregional Transit Initiative between the Cowichan Valley Regional District and the Regional District of Nanaimo. And so just some background, this initiative was identified in both the Cowichan Valley Regional District and the Regional District of Nanaimo Transit Future Plans in 2012 and 2014 respectively. A market research report in 2015 showed a primarily northbound market for VIU students, but some engagement to follow, hopefully, will either confirm that or add some potential other markets. And so the working group is composed of all 3 organizations. That's CVRD, RDN, and BC Transit. It's ourselves.
So we have, well, not all the details of the possible service have been determined yet, as we are still waiting to go to public engagement and find out more details. We have kind of thought of some preliminary service designs. So the idea for the service is that it would be a limited stop service connecting the CVRD and RDN. So it'd only probably be stopping at key locations, like major intersections, park and rides, and most likely Ladysmith as well. The service would likely use heavy-duty buses, fall within the conventional cost-sharing model with BC Transit. And the number of trips and the service frequency is one of the biggest variables we're facing, and that's flexible based off of the public demand, the demand for the service, and funding opportunities. So we are beginning our public engagement starting the week of March 30th, 2020. This is going to be a mix of in-person open houses and online survey and online and other web information. The real purpose is to inform the public about the proposal, as well as consulting them on some key aspects such as service ban, key travel times, the key destinations to provide stops and to end within the Regional District of Nanaimo, as well as we're going to be consulting the public on what they would consider a fair fare. And then one of the big components of this whole discussion will be around governance between the 2 regional districts. And there's a need to have a formal working arrangement between the 2 regional districts on how to make decisions, resolve disputes, and contribute funding to the services. And a large amount of details, including like the operations, which buses will be stored in which region, which facility, who will be in charge of maintenance, and these are all discussions that need to happen between both the regional districts and have started in our working group as well. So far, we have identified 2 possible governance options, and one could be that long-term agreement between the regional districts who's setting the roles and responsibilities. Or the other option could be applying to the province to form a transit commission similar to what's in the Capital Regional District. We've been asked to prepare 2 timelines for potential implementation. The first is looking at a September 2021 implementation. which requires some very quick actions and quick turnaround. So here we are today on March 11, 2020. Kind of moving forward, we'll be beginning the public engagement towards the end of this month and into April. We have our transit improvement program starting on going to the regional district here in April 2020 with kind of our finalized document for the service happening in May 2020 as well. The big crucial one on this 2021 timeline is if we were looking at submitting for June 21, a September 2021 implementation, all the decisions around governance, cost sharing, and everything would have to occur prior to making the commitment, as we need additional time to order buses and get the service implemented. So June 2020 is the kind of key crucial timeline for this. Then the remaining timeline kind of falls within our normal transit improvement process, where we would confirm funding in February of 2021, and then begin the detailed service planning for March 2021, in March 2021 for September 2021. Looking at a possible September 2022 implementation, that essentially all gets pushed out by an additional year, giving additional time to make all those decisions around about the decision making, the cost sharing arrangements, the operational considerations, and takes a lot of the pressure off. But mainly remains the same, but essentially throwing another year into the possible timeline. And finally, if there's any questions or comments from the board.
I have Director Wilson, then Director Sebring.
Thank you for that. It's very good. The governance options you talked about, there was a long-term agreement or a transit commission. What's the expert's preferred option on that one?
Based on our working group, our main discussions have been around that long-term agreement.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Director Sebring.
Thank you. That was going to be my question and sort of appended to that. How are we doing it with the CRD in Victoria? That's a long-term agreement, right?
The CRD is that, you mean the Cowichan Valley commuter?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is essentially a long-term agreement. Yeah.
And how's the maintenance handled? Are the buses parked there at night or here?
They're parked here.
They're parked here. Okay. My second question, it's a little bit operational and probably too far down into the weeds, but I noticed that in some of the research you did, you identified the cohort that would commute between the campuses of EIU, which is primarily youth, and that's fair. You need to know that coming up on the agenda later today is some correspondence from Miami. We've had a lot of interest in among the senior community in finding a way to connect to the other transportation hubs, being the ferry terminals. Now, I'm not in any way suggesting that we put buses from here to Duke Point, but as we build the schedule, perhaps should be some consideration to easy connections to get to those ferry terminals, and maybe the airport's a stop as well on the way up. So I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Director Stone.
Yeah. So I think that following on Director Sebring's comments, we've had several letters in the last few months around senior populations that need to access services in Nanaimo. Although we are part of the Cowichan Valley Regional District, a lot of medical specialist appointments and stuff for seniors in our community are in Nanaimo. And one of the letters we received municipally showed a tally of costs of over $400 in 1 month to get transportation to and from Nanaimo to make those specialist appointments. So I think there is a much broader cohort than maybe the previous analysis had looked at. And again, it's that engagement and who are we talking to when we're doing this engagement. Sometimes I fear that seniors are left out because they may not be as technically adept, so they may be not aware of the consultations or the studies, and therefore don't contribute as effectively as some of the younger folks. I won't say frustration, but yeah, it's frustration, is that it feels like we've been talking about this for some time, and I know all the reasons behind it, so I'm always hesitant when I've had a lot of conversations with Myrna and Jim and all of the different players in this, including staff and elected officials in Nanaimo. But it's always another year, another 2 years out. I went back through some of the conversations that we've had at this board table over the last 5 years, and according to discussions we had several years ago, we were hoping it would be 2020. Of course, that's not happening. Now we're talking 2022 if you look at the staff report. I just would say this is to the board members. I feel like if we don't push at some point, we're never going to get there. And I would, very much support trying to push for 2021 and understanding that 2022 would be worst case scenario from my perspective. But here we are today in 2020. I thought fall of 2020 was worst case scenario 5 years ago. And now we're talking about 2.5 years from today. So I just hope the board will support me in pushing for implementation on a more compressed and expedited schedule, if we can call it that now at this late stage.
Thanks for presenting. Are there any other questions for our delegates? Well, thank you so much, and don't go away. We're going to pull up the next report for you guys so you can hang tight and you can watch it. Next, we are going to, because apparently I am the boss lady, as my title was given to me today. We're going to move R1 up so that BC Transit can be here for that. And I will ask the Corporate Services Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item R1 is a report from the Facilities and Transit Division regarding the interregional transit between Regional District of Nanaimo and Cowichan Valley Regional District. And there are 2 recommendations before you.
Would you like to read the recommendations, or? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The recommendations before you are, 1, that it be recommended to the board on March 11th, 2020, that staff continue the planning and analysis work to support implementation of an interregional transit service between the CVRD and Regional District of Nanaimo for implementation in September 2022. And number 2, that staff proceed with public engagement as described in the staff report and attachment to the March 11th, 2020 Community Services Committee meeting.
Thank you. It's been moved and no seconder? Okay, we'll just discuss it first. Director Morrison. Oh, sorry, Mr. Wickham, did you want to say something first? Okay, thank you.
May as well stay up there, though. So I absolutely understand our board chair's desire to, you can't even call it expedite this, but see an earlier time horizon than a later one. I've got the report open to the option 1 and option 2, and it's 12 months. So my question through you, Madam Chair, to staff, option 2, my sense is that it's possible, but option 1 is what you're far more comfortable with. Is there consequences to the department and cost consequences, timeline consequences around this committee, and then recommending to the board that we pursue the quicker timeline, the option 2?
Mr. Wickham?
The question I expected. The challenge is going to come from, it's going to depend on the public consultation, what comes out of the public consultation. Right now, the reports have indicated the number 1 user of the connection would be VIU students back and forth and staff. But as Director Sebring has advised and has explained, we are starting to get inquiries now for ferry terminals for other particular connections, which as a working group are different services. It's pretty tough to have, because some of those, if it's going to the airport or to the ferry terminals, generally include luggage. It's a different type of a service. So once we go through the public consultation and find out are we going to reconfirm what we thought from 4 years ago, which the number 1 user group is going to be VIU and the destinations to VIU, or is it going to be something else? And so that's the first thing we have to find out. The team is aware of some desire. We know at this point from the working group that there's a preference by the RDN staff to move it up to 2021 if possible. This particular meeting, what we're looking for is just your approval to go ahead with a public consultation. There's no financial commitment or anything like that. We just want to move ahead and get that done. When we come back with the results, the next meeting would be May. If the desire is to push this up a year, the challenge is if you weren't able to pull it out of the report, BC Transit only orders buses once a year. That's the problem. We have to let them know by June, so they compile all their bus orders, do it all at one time, and that takes 12 months on a good year. So if you roll it from June to June, that's why it's September. I asked the question, what if we delayed it to September of 2021 or something like that to give a buffer? It's all regarding the buses that have to be ordered. So that's the challenge around that part. We can try to work towards that expedite, but where it's going to come down to in the May or June is this committee is going to have to agree on an agreement. We still need time to negotiate an agreement with our partner. We don't know what the slideshow talked about, the 53% local government and 47 for the province. Of our 53, we still have to somehow cost share with the RDN, and that still needs to be discussed based on the service, how much time and kilometers are in the RDN versus CVRD. Will it be a 50-50 partnership like we have with our Capital Regional District? That I don't know, and that could take some time. So that's really where it falls around. I think from our standpoint, CVRD staff, Rochelle and myself, we can do as much as we can to get as much of that ready, but maybe one option I thought about just recently is maybe if the groups are desiring this to happen, we would have to commit to the bus order, which means we need then, we're on the hook for the lease of those buses a year from now. We still have no guarantee from the province if they're going to come to the table for their share. So that still is a contingency here, that's just the way it is. Whenever we do services, we put it in place, we go to the province, we tell them what we're looking for. We're led to believe they're pretty supportive at this point, but that answer typically doesn't come until March of next year, a year from now. So we can try to bring that to you, and maybe one option would be to do an MOU. So maybe the two regions sign a pretty high-level MOU of some kind of cost sharing with details to be semi-worked out a little bit later, the specifics. And that might give you enough comfort that we're comfortable to move ahead, give the order to BC Transit order the buses, and work out a final arrangement later. That might be a possibility. But I do caution you, it's not by dragging our feet, there's a lot of work to do in this timeline.
Thank you for explaining that. I have Director Sebring.
Actually, this is a bit early. I was gonna move option 2, but maybe we want more discussion first.
Sorry, I missed Director Stone, apparently. Director Stone. Well, he just wants to move it. But
I'll move option 2 then, which basically is the same as option 1, except we substitute September 2021 for September 2022. That's the staff recommendation on the agenda. Is that seconded? Thank you. I don't need to speak to it, but I will. I think we all heard Director Stone's frustration is the wrong word, but it's frustration. This has been going on a long time, and I would totally support staff and Mr. Wakeham's vision of signing that high-level MOU. And you know what? Let's just agree we're going to do this, and we'll get to the details later. And I think we need to enter into this with RDN in good faith. I don't think they're going to insist on an 80-20 split or something unreasonable. We can get this done. I'm quite confident of it. I just heard Mr. Wakeham say that staff at the RDN is also comfortable with this 2021 implementation. So given that, let's stop pushing this out. I'm not saying we're pushing this out intentionally, but let's, instead of doing that, let's try to bring this to within a reasonable, manageable timeline. Thank you.
May I just make a comment, Madam Chair? So just a clarification if I said this incorrectly. So the RDN staff, their desire is to move it forward. I don't know what their comfort level is. They have a bigger staff at their side on the transit than we do. So that word was mentioned, that they're comfortable moving it ahead. I'm not so sure that's the desire. They want the initiative moving forward, but I don't know how much capacity they have either.
And maybe you could clarify just for myself too. I heard that you needed time to do the public engagement. And so what Director Sebring's suggesting is that we kind of skip over that and just go right ahead. No, okay.
No,
Good.
that's
No,
crucial.
So just
a
proceed.
point of
Okay.
clarification, point 2 of option 2 is the staff proceed with public engagement on the interregional transit service as described in the staff report. So we still do that.
Yeah.
We just do it more urgently, if I can put it that way.
Director Stone.
Thank you. Yeah, reading the staff report says RDN expressed interest in implementing the service for the beginning of, in September 2021, rather than the current CVRD target of 2022. I understand they have more capacity in staff, and I would ask them politely tomorrow, hopefully they've endorsed the same 2021 date, that they have the capacity to provide some additional resources to assist us in getting there, that we ask them to do so. The other part of this is the leasing of buses. I think we're going to get some pretty clear indications over the next few months based on consultation and continued engagement between the two staff groups, whether it's feasible to or recommended. And I would expect our staff have a duty to come back to the committee or board and say, listen, I know we're pushing for 2021, but it's just not able to happen, and we don't think it's an acceptable risk to go leasing the buses at this time. I think that we need to have leadership from the political body that says we want to push this service forward, because if we don't, we're going to end up, I fear, in this same conversation. I haven't forwarded the letters to our council about transit over the last couple of years because I felt my role was to come here and represent those voices from my community, but I can bring literal stacks if we need to from various user groups and citizens in our communities that are demanding this service. You see it on social media every time, including the CVRD transit facility, in local media and on political Facebook pages. The only comment is, are we finally going to get the service to Nanaimo? Now, the flip side of it is what I'm hearing from the Nanaimo elected officials is they're surprised by the uptake of people that want to go south. So I understand that the anecdotal information is, wait, there's a whole great user basis here that we haven't even consulted with. But all that does is add to the previous reports that justified that with those reports that we had enough service demand to justify the service. All we're doing is reaching out to broader user groups and finding that we may in fact have greater support for the service southbound and greater cost recovery as a result. So I strongly support the motion that's on the floor, and if necessary, I can start bringing to every meeting handfuls of letters and editorial pieces in the paper and stuff, but I've always felt that it's up to us as leadership to represent those voices and make it known at this table. So I am wholeheartedly supporting the motion that's on the floor.
Oops, motion carries. Sorry, my mic was off. Ms. Harrison, we will go back to correspondence.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next item is item C1. It's correspondence from the President of Vancouver Island Sikh Cultural Society regarding bus service to Duke Point and Departure Bay ferries.
Thank you. Next, we have
Item C2 is correspondence from the Mayor of the Municipality of North Cowichan regarding a request to the CVRD to create bus service to ferries in Nanaimo, and that too is listed for information.
Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, next item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item C3 is correspondence from the Chair of the BC Game Society regarding an invitation to bid as host of the upcoming BC Winter and Summer Games, and that too is listed for information.
Thank you. There's discussion. Director Stone.
I believe that it would be appropriate to refer this to staff with direction to investigate. I know this is an information item, but I think there is some request to gauge the feasibility and desire, And I think if we're able to refer this to staff, they can come back to us with a report on what this may mean versus other opportunities that we may have around sport tourism or other events over the next few years. So I'd like to refer item, well, probably C3 and C4 to staff for review.
So a motion to refer, second. Any discussion? Mr. Wakeham, do you need more information than, or sorry, Mr. Ilzinga, do you need more information? No. Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item C5 is correspondence from the President of the Victoria Electric Vehicle Association regarding the fee increase for the use of the direct current fast charging station at the Cowichan Community Center, and that too is listed for information.
Any discussion? I see none. Next item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next item, information, we have none, is reports. Item R1 was dealt with under item D1. Item R2 is a report from the Facilities and Transit Division regarding transit fare products, transfers, day pass, and family travel. And there is a two-part recommendation.
Welcome back, Mr. Wakeham. Do you have a presentation at all, or
I don't have
any comments?
Yeah, just a general comment. So, so just for the committee's understanding, this is not a general fare review like we typically do every 3 years, where we sort of suggest recommended increases or changes to the service products. This is seeking approval to change a couple of our fare products in particular, right? And the general fare review that we're recommending will provide to you in probably 2021 or maybe early 2022, and that's typically in the 3 to 4 year time range. And the reason for that is we'll have a better understanding of some of our key expense items. We'll have a full year operation of our new facility. There is an operator RFP that's going to go out for the operators to bid on what the operation and management fees will be for our services, plus whatever other BC Transit initiatives have for the next year or two. So this is just strictly, there's a couple key points in the report that I can go through, but I think it's pretty straightforward and just can answer any questions you might have.
Do we have any questions from the committee? Director Yanni DiNardo? Oh, it's moved. Second. Any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? Motion carries. Next item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next item is R3. It's a report from the Facility and Transit Division regarding Level 2 electronic vehicle charging station management and fees at CVRD-owned facilities, and that is for direction.
Mr. Wakeham.
Thank you. So just an introduction to this. The staff report does provide a lot of details and information, and it's worth noting that currently right now there's no one central CVRD function or service or a policy that's responsible for all the charging stations that we have, with, in particular the ones the public have access to. Our division, which is transit and facilities, we have no plans to increase the number of publicly available stations. There is no overall CVRD electric vehicle or electric vehicle charging station strategy. Plus, some of you may be aware when we speak at the rec center commissions, each rec center is subsidizing the electric vehicle users for free electricity consumed. The amounts vary depending on the usage of each facility, and they're quite dramatically different from Shawnigan Lake to Lake Cowichan to Carey Park to Cowichan Community Center. But to give you some range here, they range from subsidies of about $500 on the low end, $500 per year to $2,000 per year, but that's just to cover the hydro costs. If you factor in other costs, the maintenance, administration, the capital replacement, it's jumping to about $1,500 to $3,500 per facility, but it depends on the usage. So staff are really wishing to seek direction on the potential implementation of the fees for our level 2 charging stations. Not that this has nothing to do with the DCFC at Cowichan Community Center right now. So today, what's in the report, we're not asking you to decide on a specific fee or an amount, whether it's per minute or per kilowatt hour or other. The report provides 4 options for you to consider, and for staff really to develop a policy and fee structure and come back to you on. The 4 that are outlined in the report are if a fee was set to be specific to each facility, in other words, each rec center would charge their own or set their own fee, and that would likely or could likely end up with a different fee at each rec center. If there's a desire to have a fee that's consistent among the rec centers, that could also be done if there was an amount set that, for example's sake, if we just set $1 at each one per hour or per minute or wherever you want, there'd be consistency, but there would be differences of net profit or net loss at each place, because do you set it at the high or the low, depending on the usage? This could be a much bigger issue that I'm kind of looking at, because there's really no overriding function or service that's responsible for this. And with the pressure of the public wanting more charging stations and potentially the grants out there, if there was a desire to have a fee come out of a thorough long-term plan that would include one CVRD function to be responsible for our electric vehicle charging stations operating and replacing them at whatever point in time, potentially even the locations of where they would be. Or the last one we're suggesting is we stay status quo and do not implement a fee at this point. So we're not looking for a dollar amount. We're looking for what type would you like staff to come back to you with. We'll do some number crunching again and come back and say, based on what your desire is of us to look at, what type of strategy.
Thank you. First I have Director Stone and then Director Morrison.
Well, as usual on EV stuff, I'm of two minds. And I was kind of involved in the controversy on the EV groups around the charging of the DCFC. And I think this letter that we got earlier in the agenda spoke to that controversy. But I also, as a local government leader, understand the difference between public services and fuel consumption of vehicles. I couldn't imagine us ever offering a fuel station for gasoline vehicles for free. Earlier on in this fledgling adoption times, when I bought my 2012 Leaf as a short-range EV owner, yes, I used the Shawnigan Lake one a little bit, so I don't know if I need to claim that on my gifts that I've received from the community, but keep in mind that there's some awkwardness there when there's frustration amongst non-EV taxpayers to be subsidizing fuel consumption by other vehicle users. On the flip side, there's well, they're doing a good thing for the environment. Early adopters need some encouragement. The federal and provincial governments have shown that through their subsidies to EVs, that they're trying to encourage adoption, and the free charging helps support those types of initiatives. That said, you're seeing the first wave of commercial operators come forward. So as now a Tesla owner on my third electric vehicle, I pay for my supercharging. Yes, I got some free time from Tesla, but now it costs me substantially less than gas, but it's based on a cost recovery model. That's the cost of the station, the power to provide it, and the maintenance and repair and replacement costs are all factored in. That's sound business management. So my bias is to not jump to charging, but to be looking at the future and look at something like option 3 that says, how do we look at EV charging more holistically, talking with the municipalities in the region and the CVRD, how do we form public charging policy that makes sense and is more thoughtful than just saying, let's charge either the same fee or different fees. Different fees, I think, is a terrible, consistency is important. But on the flip side, I think by the time we get to that stage, we may be seeing that commercial operators are coming forward. You've seen Petrocan make investments. You see private operators like Superstore has a movement across the country, Canadian Tire. Right now, they're offering free charging to incentivize people to come to their locations. Those are the kinds of initiatives we're going to see more and more, and there's federal granting programs and provincial granting programs available to do that. So then it leads me to, maybe we should just wait and see, because I feel like if we go to the effort and expense, because it's not free, to come back with a smart policy that would be option 3 in the report, which is what I would support if we're going to move forward with any short-term changes, that by that time it may essentially be out of date by the practices of the private sector. As an EV owner, and we have 3 in our family and all we drive is electric, I personally have difficulty in subsidizing fuel costs because I think it hurts the adoption and the perception of EVs and EV owners. You can see the high degree of vandalism at EV stations and to electric vehicles, things like coal rolling. The experience of EV owners is that they feel that they're somewhat made uncomfortable just by this fact of, people's perception of, oh, you get something free that we don't. And we're very careful. We have 2 EV charging stations at home. The joy of owning a EV is you get up every morning and it's fully charged. You don't need to fuel up. However, there are those times when you're traveling long distances in your 2012 Leaf and you can't get to Victoria from Ladysmith without stopping in Shawnigan. So I'm not sure, and I think I'm almost in conflict as an EV owner, but I would support either option 3 or 4. With 3 would be, let's have a holistic, more thoughtful, region-wide approach to EV charging, come to an agreement as a board. I would support a cost recovery model, maybe by doing the proper report and looking at it more holistically, we can kind of bridge the gap between free today and pay tomorrow, or not doing something and waiting for the private sector to sort of broaden their adoption, and also changing the behavior of owners that even with my level 1 charger that came with my Leaf, I go home empty. My Leaf's here today. I go home empty at night. I know that I can get it fully charged in the morning even off of 110. So I'll leave it to the rest of the board to possibly decide, but I would push you all towards options 3 or 4.
Director Morrison.
Thank you. Director Stone covered a lot there, and I'm going to step back a little bit because I was around when those first subsidized offers of charging stations came to the regional district, and where and how and all of these questions were asked initially. And you know, I'm just in contemplation of this. As long as I've been here, we've also contemplated whether or not we could be doing better in all of our fleet management practices, everywhere from parking to what are the right vehicles and the conversion over to electric or hybrid of some sort. So there is that question as well, and I know that's not what's being asked of us in this report, but it's always occurred to me that when these programs, the subsidy programs became available, that we were only being asked to be a transition from a fossil fuel-based internal combustion engine world to this new wonderful world of electric vehicles, and that there was no anticipation, as Chair Stone said, that local government was going to be opening up electric stations everywhere in replacement of the private sector. And we have seen the private sector step up, and as I think he's mentioned, Petro-Canada and other private service providers. I think the question is raised, should local government taxpayers, who we have such an inefficient system for raising dollars to provide the services that we provide, should they be going to subsidize people that are fortunate enough to be able to buy electric vehicles and benefit from the cost savings? I'm not an electric vehicle owner. I would aspire to be one at some point. Not practical at this point. So I think there is that little bit of hesitation of taxpayers thinking that anyone that wants to come to a free charging station that is provided by local government is getting free charging. But where I'm coming to in my comments is that local governments shouldn't jump into things, and a lot of thought went into the consideration of whether or not we would provide these initial charging stations. What I think our role is more of is to nudge people in our services, nudge people in the change of behavior, and I looked at the fact that we are the highest cost fast charge provider on Vancouver Island, and I think that's good. I think it's a good thing. So if there's going to be people wanting to avail themselves of this service, then they should pay a little bit for it. I think that we're in a place where we should be, I think, planning an exit strategy. Maybe we can have the odd, low cost, low fee charging stations at some of our facilities, but I don't think we should be the primary service that is relied upon for charging. I think that private sector should be jumping in and taking this on, and I think there's lots of opportunity for them there. So I'm more inclined to take a look at this. I think option 3 or 4 is one of what Director Stone had mentioned. I could see us developing a long-term plan, maybe looking at a little bit of fleet management, but I don't think we should be changing a whole bunch of what we do at this point. So thank you.
I have Director Sebring.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Interesting discussion. I was at the table at what was then the Island Savings Center Commission when we put in the first chargers. And, some of the language that's already been used by Directors Morrison and I think Stone with respect to an early encouragement of getting people to use this technology. The initial bridge to get it started, sort of the transition away from fossil fuels. Add to that the fact that in the days when we first set this up, we were not allowed to charge. BC Hydro is the only entity in British Columbia that's allowed to sell electricity. I think that's still true today. I think the way we get around it is we charge for parking time, and you can plug in while you're there. But be that as it may, that was sort of the history of this at that time. And at that time, I said, well, if that's the only option and it moves forward, that's okay. But, you know, Director Stone mentioned it. Nobody expects us to set up a gas station and allow people to fill up there for free. And yet, essentially, that's what we're doing with this electric vehicle thing. Particularly because the landscape now is changing. The initial thought here was to introduce people to electric, to make it easy, to encourage the transition. That's now begun. Electric vehicles are becoming more mainstream, and I think it's important for us to, as Director Morrison said, start thinking about an exit strategy and turning this over to the private sector. They're now working on it. If we're going to continue to provide it, I don't think we should continue to provide it at a subsidy. If I were to look at the 4 options that are here before us, I would go for either option 2 or 3. And my preference would be number 2, to develop a consistent fee at all the facilities in recognition of the fact that that consistent fee should, across the board, find a way to have us break even. We don't need to make money on this, but I don't think we need to subsidize it anymore. I think we're beyond those days. I think we need to be responsible with the taxpayers' money and say, okay, Petro-Canada's coming on board, Canadian Tire, we just heard Superstore, you know, all these other options are out there. So our job in terms of providing that initial push, doing the transition, doing the early encouragement, I would argue that job has now been largely completed and it's time to move on. So I'm not going to make a motion, but I'd prefer option 2. I could support option 3, but the problem to me with option 3 is while we develop the long-term plan, as Director Stone said, probably the private sector is going to catch up with us and the long-term plan will be outdated by the time it comes to this table. So as far as I'm concerned, let's just bite the bullet, figure out what it's costing us, set that fee and move forward.
Thank you. I've got Director Yanni DiNardo, Staples, and then I'll insert myself. And then I still have, I have you on the list, then there's more people. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to echo, I'm in agreement with a lot of what's already been said. I do think option 2 or 3, I came into it after reading everything thinking 2 because I sit on both commissions. I sit in Kerry Park and the Cowichan Community Center, and I love it when these great grants come forward and give us all this wonderful stuff and then we're stuck with it. These are the issues we have when we take on these grants, but it was a transition period and I don't think we should be paying for it. And we also, and I was the person that at the new transit station that really thought we needed one there as well, but there is now, I obviously see the issues. Is it for staff or will you have everybody in the neighborhood coming to plug in? I had it in my mind that it would be for staff that would have vehicles that would need to be there, and then just encouraging once again. So I would also think of number 2. It's 2 or 3 for me as well, but I'm closer to the 2. And I think that these things just lead us. The long term always leads us into another dilemma. But we should sort of nip it in the bud now because we have been over and over again in our commissions with the same issues. So I think we need to clarify this and move on. But we've done a great job transitioning for the public. The public sector's done a great job to move it and give it to the private sector now.
Thank you. Director Staples.
Yeah, I'd like to actually see 2 and 3 be combined into one motion. Because I think it would be important to develop a transition plan. And one way that we can do that is through signage at the areas that we do have, that we're working on a transition into a fee for service to give people time to understand that that is coming rather than just have it fall on them. We've done that in the city with different things, and it's worked really well for transitioning people into something new. So I'd like to see 2 and 3 combined in a motion once we're ready to go there, that we develop a consistent fee at all CVRD facilities, blah, 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 with a transition that includes signage to let people know that this is happening, that fees will be implemented, and that then to develop the long-term plan. Because I feel like we should have those always as part of what we offer to people when they're traveling. If I'm going to something at the theater and there's not a gas station close, I'm not going to leave it parked there while I go do something. So I think it's important to continue to have those services, but just that we do it clearly for the community to be prepared for it.
Mr. Wakeham, did you? No, sorry.
No comments yet. I'm holding it.
Thank you. I'm going to insert myself here. I think a lot has been covered, and I agree with a lot that's been said. I'm also in agreement with leaving it status quo just to figure out what does happen, because sometimes I feel like we implement fees, and then the process of implementing the fees costs more than what you get back when you've taken all that time to figure it out. I am an electric vehicle owner, and I never require it locally, and we did require it in Up Island, and the local community center didn't have one. So I think it is something that you do expect community centers to have, and I hope that we would keep it that way. I would also like to hear what the commissions have to say about this, because they've been the ones supporting it. And I know that I think the Shawnigan Lake one, it probably has some high fees. And so how would that work? Because there's a big licensing fee, I understand. And then, would that be removed? And so I think we're opening up a big can of worms, maybe prematurely, and we can see what the market offers us. But Mr. Wakeham, maybe can you comment on, like, you said somewhere quite high, and then how would we, well, I guess I'm finding it hard to picture how we would, suddenly this would become, every single one would become a regional function. Would we need a new function for that?
It's not an easy initiative to look at here, but here's sort of the challenge. When I sort of suggested a long-term approach, this is more about which division should this really fall under? Should this be economic development, which has a lot of pluses? Should this be environmental initiatives, trying to maintain lower greenhouse gases? I personally don't think it should be the rec centers, but that's where they are now, and they are subsidizing, and there are, I would venture to say, the majority of the time is not, now this is just a common statement, it is not individuals that are plugging in and going into our facilities and using our facilities. That was what we originally thought. They would go to CCC, they'd go to the box office, buy a ticket, come back out. That's not what's happening. The majority of the time, people are plugging in and leaving and coming back and getting a free a charge, if you will, for the most part, right? And what's interesting, I didn't comment on the Victoria Electric Vehicle Association's letter, which we'll look into. They raised some points, and we'll look at it. But what's interesting, and they comment about, they support a fee to be assessed. Now, they mixed two things in that letter. They mixed the direct current fast charge station at CCC, and then they also spoke about level 2s. What's interesting to know, just a little digression for a second, because that one actually has a minimum fee. The CCC fee, the service provider that BC Hydro forces us to use, force is not the right word, obligates us to use, Greenlots, charges 91 cents to us. So right now on a $2.50 minute, it used to be on a $2 minimum, they take 91 cents. They're taking almost 50% of the revenue. We don't have a choice. So you plug in, and if it goes for more than 0.5 of a kilowatt or 1 minute, that's when the fee applies, which is pretty much instantly almost, right? So you're right, the fees that go into this, we have a licensing fee, I think it's around $600 US per facility, it might be a little off with that. Then it's the consumption fees are the highest, the power that we're getting, right? We do have huge vandalism in Shawnigan where we're not sure what to do. That's the third time that is being vandalized, but each one is $700-800 to fix the screen, right? And that doesn't count administration time. And then we have to look at the capital replacement. We've been through a whole transition. The first phases of the level 2s that were put in the rec centers, we replaced them all a year ago. So we just went through a life cycle that lasted 6.5-ish years, and they were about $4,500 each. So when you're talking about what fee should we set, whether it's consistent or whether it's individual, there's a whole bunch to that. When I say a long-term effect, I'm thinking more internally, speaking to our senior management team, which division should this belong to? Which one is going to come up with this? And the real pressure is coming from, we are getting complaints from staff, we are getting complaints from residents about subsidizing electric vehicles. We are getting letters, and the one in front of you, that support us to start charging a fee, implementing a fee, if you will. But I understand the whole economic development side and the rest of it, right? That's sort of the debate back and forth, what you want to do. But when I talk about long-term, it's not this year, unless there's a different direction here. If you want to institute a fee, you would have to give staff a direction. And that's kind of what we're looking at. We're not asking you the price, just which one of the options would you like?
Thank you. I would like to send it to the commission, though, if we were gonna, because it'd be nice to see the numbers, but anyway, I have Director Kuhn.
Thank you. The service itself is actually a very small portion of whatever our expenses are. So it's not really a big issue. But the big issue is that it's one more example of the CVRD getting involved in something that carries it away from the basic service that we provide. So now we're getting involved into fuel service for cars. And the initial idea was not bad. It was well meant, and it was supposed to encourage. But now we're at a stage where we're getting flack, and I personally, I'm not in favor of subsidizing anything. As far as I'm concerned, if a service is provided, unless it is an essential service like we have many of them, this kind of thing should be carrying itself. And if it can't do that, then we should scrap it. We're going down a road again where if we go on that road and there'll be more requests for more charging stations, and then yes, the question as to what function does it fall under. So then this whole issue gets blown up, and again we'll be faced with something that initially we never even thought of, and now suddenly it comes up, and then, well, what are we going to do now? And I don't like that idea, period. And I'm prepared to make a motion, and my motion is to pursue option 2.
That's motion, and it's been second. So to the motion, I have, well, I'll read my list if anybody wants to stay on it. I have Stone, Smith, Wilson, Morrison, Salmon. Director Stone.
Well, I think that the motion is short-sighted and really ignores the realities of public charging infrastructure. Level 2 stations shouldn't be long-term. They need to be phased out. They're not public infrastructure. They take hours to provide a meaningful charge, and although I do appreciate them at Shawnigan, and yes, in that context, it does economic development, because then I walk around the village for a couple hours and spend money. I'd much rather spend that money on a DC fast charge and be in and out of there in 20 minutes. No offense to Shawnigan. I love the place, but I'd like to plan my visits when I got time for a visit. Public infrastructure should not be level 2 charging stations. They're slow, they're great for overnight at home, but they're not public infrastructure. Public infrastructure should be the charge that you got at home under your own dollar to fuel your vehicle isn't sufficient to get you where you need to go. You pull over for 15 or 20 minutes, top up, and get along to your destination. So what's been happening in other regional districts, without naming names, maybe the other CVRD, talking about 18 level 2 stations is just thinking like it's 2012 all over again. So the reason I support number 3 and not number 2 is I would expect that maybe staff would come back and say we have a phased, that we don't replace the level 2 stations in many locations when they come up for the next replacement. If we had this conversation before we replaced those $4,500 stations, I would say we should be pooling that money, going to the province for a grant, and maybe finding a second location for a DC fast charger that would be built with a full cost recovery model. no private sector fuel station long-term, and we see some former mobile stations in the Lower Mainland have been bought by a company that's converting them to fully electric DC fast charging, 8 stations, 8 bays at one station, because you're in and out in 15 to 20 minutes. We need to take a more holistic look at charging, or not charging for charging, but actually how public infrastructure around charging is. I'm not necessarily sure that staff wouldn't come back and say, after consulting with some private providers, by the time we institute a new policy, you're going to see a number of new private facilities in the area. I would not presuppose that staff may come back and say, you know what, based on the market direction, level 2 chargers should be phased out completely, and that there'll be strategic locations for DC fast chargers in partnership with BC Hydro and the provincial government. Just moving to charge at level 2 stations sounds like a convenient answer, but I would like to see a more thoughtful, longer-term look at EV charging in the region, and it wouldn't include any further investment in level 2 charging.
Director Smith?
Well, this is an
No, that's right.
interesting topic. We encourage people to look towards climate change, and the electric vehicle is looking towards climate change and making changes. But electric vehicles receive a federal grant and a provincial grant, and those grant funds are already taxpayers subsidizing those electric vehicles. Not everyone has the financial capacity to actually own an electric vehicle, and they may not be able to own one for many years. We're looking at regional recreation, so we're encouraging people to come to our recreation facilities, and they're putting gas in their vehicle to transport themselves to use the facilities. So I think we need to look at a little bit of an exit strategy, moving into the private sector, or removing ourselves totally if you're having all the private sector like Canadian Tire and all the other areas putting in chargers that will adequately charge these vehicles and get them back on the road as quickly as possible. Maybe they aren't necessary at a recreation facility or any of the CVRD facilities if the private sector is stepping up to do that. But I think we need to look at an exit strategy.
I have Director Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to read the first sentence from this on the purpose and introduction. The purpose of this report is to seek direction regarding management and implementation of user fees for public use on level 2 electric vehicles. That's it, one sentence, very simple question. We've been sitting here for the last hour talking about whether we're going to charge or not. It's quite simple. User pay. And I'm in full favour of option 2 that's on the thingy just now. Do we really have to bring in economic development to this, and who's going to pay and how we're going to implement how to charge and all the rest of it? It's completely off the point here. The question is, how do we do it there? Let's do it. Option 2 is as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
I have Director Morrison, Salmon, Kuhn, Yanni DiNardo, Stone. You still want to be on there, Director Stone? Yes, anyone else? Director Sebring.
Yeah, thank you. And I see the merit and looking at whether or not we're charging at level 2s, but quite frankly, it was a bit of a lost leader when they were first put in, and I don't think it was ever intended that we were going to try and make money or even recover costs from them when they were put in. I was there when the discussions were held, and part of that whole equation was we've got new people using this new technology, and they will be coming to our facilities. Let's do what we can to ensure that those people can get a charge if they're here. Now, what's become very clear is that component of the intended use when they first put in has completely disappeared. I know at the Cowichan Lake Sports Arena, we get people complain because of the location of where it's at. It's not a prime parking spot. They have to park around the back. So we literally get complaints about providing a service. We also have at the, in the town of Lake Cowichan, there's electric vehicle charging near the visitor center. Now, the purpose of that, from what I understand, was that the visitors could go in, get information from the visitor centers, do some charging, and now, from what I understand, nobody is able to access the charging because there's long-term people coming in there, parking in the morning, and they're leaving their vehicles there all day. So, and I don't know if they're charging or not, but, so that portion of one of the considerations that we had when we first discussed this was, is moot now. I think that the word exit strategy has been used. I think that when it comes to the level twos, we should probably be looking at a plan to get out of that business. I don't want to invest any more money in technology to figure out how to make the old chargers make us some money. I want to get out of that and look at providing the newest, latest technology if we deem it appropriate. And you know what? It probably isn't appropriate at community centers, or all community centers. I can see right downtown at Cowichan, but not at most of them. So I think we have to look at the long term. I don't think I'm going to support number 2 just simply because we're probably throwing good money after bad and trying to develop a way to collect money from the old technology. Let's let them run their course and take them out. Thanks.
Director Salmon?
Thank you. I'll be brief. I won't support option 2. I think our discussion's made it clear so far. It's a big issue. It's a growing issue. The transition's just begun. I think we need a thoughtful long-term management plan, which is option 3. Thank you.
Director Kuhn, to your motion. Nope. Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to, could I do an amendment? I'd like to add 3, 2 and 3. I just see that there's value in both of them. So, no, can't do that? It's a completely different motion? I want to include black and white. Okay, thank you. So,
Director Stone.
I just want to be clear. So we're saying that if it's 3, it includes 2? Did I hear that from someone? How does that?
Option 2, staff will report back.
Why can't we can?
All options are. Madam Chair, if I may,
Yes.
all options we're going to report back. What we're looking for is, what would you like us to do? So if you suggest a fee be implemented, which is options 1 or 2, we haven't given you the information on what type of fee. Do you want it per minute, per hour? Do you want it per kilowatt? How do you want it charged? So staff will take back the direction, whatever you give us, and we'll work on coming back with a report saying, if you, whatever you're going to suggest to us, just hypothetically, if it's number 2, which is a consistent amount, we will give you options of what that could be at a fully break even. And because it's consistent and because the charges are different for each rec center, there's going to be some above and some below moderately. But so either one of these, we're going to come back. But I would, one other comment, if I may, just for your consideration, it's in the report. And I'm not trying to sway one way or the other. If you did implement a fee, there's only one other entity, which is Esquimalt, that is charging for level 2s on the island. Just so you know, just be aware of that, that's all.
Thank you. Director Stone.
So I was going to be clear, I won't support number 2. I would support number 3 because staff will come back and hopefully, and again, this is then a question to Mr. Wakeham, would a review of a long-term strategy look at things like possibly going through the remaining life cycle of level 2 stations and removing them, looking at what appropriate public infrastructure would be like, partnering on a couple more fast charging stations in the region? Because I want to be clear, Superstore in Duncan does not have one. Nanaimo does.
Yeah.
Canadian Tire in Duncan does not have one.
Right.
Nanaimo does.
Yes.
Petro-Canada in Duncan does not have one. Nanaimo does. So we haven't been able to encourage our private facilities. So there's going to be a gap here. So I would say that 5 years from now, you're going to have public or private providers that can completely supplant public infrastructure. I'm fully supportive of a full cost recovery model. What I'm saying is level 2 shouldn't be continually invested in. We need to look at what a proper long-term strategy looks like, and that may include decommissioning level 2.
Mr.
If I
Wakeham.
may add a comment, what is in part of number 3 is more about and we'll get you some information. Should the CVRD be in the business of providing electric charging stations? And if so, should it come from the planning development side, when people put in development applications? Should that be where it is, as opposed to facilities or rec centers trying to decide if it should be out at their site? So it'd be all encompassing of that. We'll come back and suggest to you, if that's your decision, we'll come back and sort of look at, after I speak to senior management, who's gonna take this on? That's number one. Number two is, if we think long-term, I'm talking about replacement strategies. So right now, we should get 5 years out of the new ones, we just put them in. In a course of 5 years, if we choose to replace them, what would they be replaced with? And maybe a faster one. I'm not sure right now if BC Hydro would support. They're about 50,000. They've come down. They were 80. They're down to 50 or 40. I don't know if they would give a grant to put a fast one in Shawnigan as an example. They typically want it on the main arteries, right? To your point as well on Superstore and Canadian Tire, this was discussed at the CCC Commission because that's where the DCSC station is. BC Hydro notified us 3-4 months ago. They're trying to find a private operator. I can't make names because it's not a done deal yet. They're trying to get that. And when they get their operator, which we're understanding will be close to the Trans-Canada Highway, they will give us the choice. Do you want to remove our one? We don't own the one at CCC. BC Hydro does. Do you want to remove it and stop the costs we're incurring, or do you want to carry on? If we carry on, we pay the full cost from that point on. And there is no, it's an outdated station. It's old technology, which I would recommend not to, but we'll get to that point, right? So the full term is going to talk about where should these maybe go, what entity, what division should be making that decision, and then we'll look at some costs as well. So it's likely 3 to 6 months down the road before we're going to come back to you on that. We're going to need some time it's much more inclusive rather than just deciding on a fee.
Thank you. To the motion, could we call the question? Nope, so we got Sebring, Smith, Kuhn.
Just a question to,
Sorry.
just a question to Mr. Wakeham through you, Madam Chair. Option 2 that's before us is a motion now that staff draft a policy and fee structure. Would that policy include the notion of looking at decommissioning the level 2s over the long term? That's not precluded by this motion, is it?
That wasn't the intent. The intent with number 2 was we would come back and say, okay, you want it to be consistent. We would give you some dollar amounts per kilowatt, per hour, per whatever it's going to be. We would show you, because they're going to be consistent, what the net result is going to be for each rec center, because it's going to be different. There's going to be a couple break-even winners, there's going to be a couple that are going to be on losing. We would say that to you. It wasn't the intent to look at, would we look to transition and decommission them? I guess you could make that a amendment to the option if you like.
Because that's why I kind of liked Director Yanadinardo's idea of appending option 3 onto this. My concern is if we just go with option 3, we're kicking this 6 to 8 months down the line, and in this, and I'm sorry, but in this environment, which is as fast changing as it is, 6 to 8 months down the line is a heck of a long time.
Right.
And I'd like to move to cost recovery as soon as we could while we look at some of the long-term stuff, the valid points that Director Stone raises about decommissioning the phase 2s and some of that other stuff. But what I'm seeing here is that either we implement a fee now or we have to wait 6 or 8 months, and I'd like to do both in the sense that I'd like to implement the fee now but have staff develop that long-term look at some of those things that Director Stone.
So if I may respond to that, Madam Chair. So we're sort of just conversing, saying that would be like a step process. So if the intent is to get to addressing the subsidy with right now it's being suggested number 2, we'll work on that, and then we will look at, and again, communicating with our senior management team, who's going to take this on to work towards what you're talking about. Do we get out of this? Do we look at DCFCs only in these places? That can be, but that's going to be phase 2 because it's going to take more time. It's going to be.
See,
But we could get the fees in a lot. Again, we're going to bring it back to you. The next meeting will be in May. We'll say, here's some options and here's a recommended price, and you can decide then. And then we'll carry on with doing whatever point 3 was.
I don't particularly care which option we go for as long as that's the result. That's what I'm looking for, is end the subsidy, but let's develop the long-term strategy.
Okay, Ms. Harrison?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just curious if Director Sebring is interested in making an amendment to the current motion on the floor to combine it with option 3.
Well, that's what Director Yananargo tried to do and was ruled out of order. I mean, I'd be all
I'd like to
for
call
that.
the question. Is there anyone who'd like to speak? Okay, there's Director Smith, Director Kuhn, Director Stone. Director Smith.
Thank you. Through the chair to Mr. Wickham, can you please tell me if, would an exit strategy be in number 3 as part of the long-term planning?
We can do that. We can add that to it. The intent of long-term planning, again, was don't do anything right now. Let us think about what division should be dealing with this, because it's going to be a different spin. If economic development thinks that they should be in control of this, they may have a different philosophy than environmental initiatives, which is going to want to deal with greenhouse gas, or maybe it stays in facilities. I don't really know. But that's kind of, we're trying to figure out where does this belong? This is sort of expanding because, and we haven't even talked about our own electric vehicle charging stations at the building for our own fleet. But it's growing because we're getting some pressure to add more of those as well. And the question is, well, who's doing this and what's sort of the governance of it? So we could, if you'd like, if number 3 was to look long-term, if you'd like to say including a possible exit strategy, that's up to you if you'd like to do that.
Director Kuhn.
Yes,
No, I said Smith, Kuhn, Stone. You had a follow-up?
do you want to interrupt me, man? No.
I'll put you back on the list. Is that okay?
The reason I opted for option 2 is because option 3 just kicks it down the road. And quite frankly, I don't want a long-term strategy on charging stations. I want to be out of them. I don't want a long-term. If we start planning for, okay, what are we going to do in the next 5 to 10 years? Well, it'll be on the books forever. And I don't want to be, I want to get out of this stuff. So anyway, and another thing, option 2 doesn't exclude fast charging stations. That's not the wording in there. So that wouldn't be an excuse to say, well, we'll opt for another option. Option 2 includes everything. So no, I want to have it short and sweet. Let's get rid of this.
Mr. Wakeham?
Can I just provide clarification? We're only talking about level 2s with this report, not the DCFC. So whatever you're going to decide today is only referring to the level 2 stations, not the one at CCC.
Thank you. I have Director Stone and I put Director Smith back on the list. Is there anyone else? Thank you.
Yeah, I just think that if we're going to get out of it, going to the trouble of instituting fees and collection mechanisms, and there's additional licensing fees with ChargePoint when you start charging a fee as well. So not only do you have to charge the fee, you have to charge the fee to charge the fee on top of it.
Yes.
And if we actually are going to look at a long-term strategy that may include decommissioning level 2 charging, we may spend more money developing a fee in the short term than will actually be recovered during the life cycle of those level 2 chargers. So there's sunk costs right now, unless we're going to try and go back and recover fees from the last 5 years, which would make them not used because the fee would be so exorbitant that people wouldn't use them. By the time we actually have a proper, thoughtful analysis that allows the board to vote on good policy, we may find that the charging of those level 2 stations is inconsequential because we should be letting them live out their life cycle and decommissioning them. Then it goes to, what about the one outside Shoppers Drug Mart? What about the one at Charles Huey Park? All the municipal ones that wouldn't be rolled up in this would just pick up the slack, and you would not get use out of the ones that are charging 45 cents a kilowatt hour at CCC, so you'd get no cost recovery. So to do a proper decision at a board level, we need some analysis. I would support option 3. As a long experienced person who advocates for cost recovery on EV charging, I can absolutely not support level 2. I think it's terrible policy without proper analysis.
Director Smith?
I think we all need to go back to the Local Government Act and look at what our mandate is here at the table. I mean, we've had a discussion for I don't know how long about electric vehicles with taxpayers subsidizing it. And it was a business we shouldn't have actually gotten into. It should be under the private sector. It just seems that we're going around in circles, so I'm not sure I support anything at the moment.
Director Morrison, are you on here?
Yes, I actually have a question for Mr. Wakeham. So my understanding is when we put the new equipment in, or when consideration was given, there wasn't an expectation we would embark on a cost recovery program at that point. That wasn't that long ago, 18 months ago. So 18 months ago, the rec commissions weren't saying, go, well, maybe at yours, but I guess my question is there a cost for the technology that would have to be secured and applied to this for the level 2 stations that we would have to purchase or machines or whatever at this point to be able to start charging for this? Is there additional equipment required?
No, there's no additional cost. So the cost, there's a licensing fee, Director Stone talked about. The licensing fee allows your third-party service provider, which is Green Lots for the one at CCC, it's Charge Point, which would be a little bit different. It's Charge Point for level 2s. If we were to set a fee, hypothetically $1, we have to negotiate with them what their take is. I'm telling you, the take is almost 50% at CCC. We're negotiating that as well, as low as we can. But to answer your question, there's no added cost. The machines are running, the charging stations are running as they're supposed to. And just to speak to your point about, you're right, when we had to switch over because there was no warranty anymore, we couldn't get parts. So we had to quickly switch over, and we got a really good discounted rate, which was very good. The exception is, at CCC, they made it clear to me they wanted it set for the fast charge station, and they wanted the level 2 stations looked at as soon as possible to implement a fee. And that's why we thought, well, it's really hard to do one at one rec center. What are we doing? That's why we brought it to you. What's the direction? That's why we're looking for your direction here. Oh, yeah, so when you charge a fee, so again, at Cowichan Community Center, the minimum we're charging is $2.50 for anybody to plug in. Green Lots, right, and we lose 13 cents GST off that. Green Lots takes 91 cents. That's the negotiated agreement we have with them now. We're trying to renegotiate, but right now that's what we've been paying for the last 5 years. That's the fast one. When we do level 2, the only fee we're paying is a licensing fee and maintenance and BC Hydro's costs. There's nothing else because we're not charging a fee. When you move to charging a fee, Green Lots is going to be Charge Point, my mistake, a third party, it doesn't really matter who it is, but they're going to do that service for you, let people put their credit card in there or however they pay and deal with all that, and they're going to take a fee. It's yet to be negotiated what that is. And because right now, there's very few places that are doing that. So it has to be negotiated. I don't know what that fee would be. So before we set the fee, we're gonna make a call to Charge Point. If we set this at hypothetically $1, how much are you gonna take? We have to negotiate that. And they're gonna ask approximately how many uses will you have in a year, and you go through a whole negotiation phase. So when you set a fee of $1, the CVRD does not get the $1. We probably have to set it at higher level, $2 possibly.
Thank you. I think the market's going to take care of making these obsolete anyway. The Tesla's already doing 600-kilometer charges, and who's going to stop for 2 hours to charge when you can stop for 10 minutes? And anyway, I'd like to call the question. All those in favor of number 2? Opposed? Motion is defeated. Director Yanni DiNardo. Do I have a seconder?
Can I make a friendly amendment before it's seconded, including the option of discontinuing level 2 charges at the end of the current life cycle?
Do I have a second? So that's a friendly amendment. Do I need another seconder? That's the seconder. Do we need any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
And we'll take 10 minutes, 1:45. We don't have enough time? Okay, 5 minutes. None? Okay, sorry, no break. I thought I was getting the ayes for a break. We'll go through. To our corporate secretary, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item R4. Item R4 on the agenda is the report from the Public Safety Division regarding the Cowichan Valley Fire Department Regional Mutual Aid Agreement. And the recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that the mutual aid agreement between the CVRD, City of Duncan, District of North Cowichan, Town of Lake Cowichan, Cowichan Bay Improvement District, Mill Bay Fire Protection District, Shawnigan Improvement District, Thetis Island Improvement District, and Town of Ladysmith to provide to provide fire services during emergencies for a term ending December 31st, 2024 be approved.
I have it moved and second. Is there any discussion? No discussion. I'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item R5 is a report from the Public Safety Division regarding Emergency Support Services, ESS contract, and the recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that the 2020 budget for Function 205, Public Safety, be amended to 1, increase transfer from operating reserves to $15,000, and 2, increase 4070, I assume that's budget function 4070, emergency social services by $15,000 to fund a prorated emergency support services delivery contract through the Canadian Red Cross.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries. Oh, any opposed? Sorry, none opposed. Next, we move to question period. Are there any questions from the public? I don't see any. Moving on to adjourn. Moved, second, any discussion? None. Any? Call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.